Yep. I think she's ready.
And is Jean with us?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they just say,
Hi, Larry.
Hi.
We met when talking about
Oh,
pre-qualification.
oh, yeah.
Application. I knew you were-
Is the new form out yet?
Not yet.
Yeah, I wondered, because I just, Ireland asked me, I don't know why they asked me for last year's, their submittal, but they needed back something.
They were bidding on some of our projects recently.
Oh, okay.
That's what I thought.
Oh,
Yeah, we're just working through some stuff with the city's attorneys.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah. That's, yeah, I think it'd be going out. I did it last year, that summer, under contract, so I'm in good shape. As
Yeah.
far as this year right now. There's a lot coming, but it'd be nice to get that performance.
yes, working on it. I'll
Thank you very
be sure
much.
to send it out as soon as it's done.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Just curious.
Yeah.
He was in there.
It's not lunchtime.
I know, but I have to come every day, I haven't changed it. And it went up, it was, you could buy two for 99 cents a piece, now they're almost $3.
Well, it's good to have you over here.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good break, I can take a break, so.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well,
Super trained. You know a lot about
council meeting last night, TEUC, we need a meeting tomorrow night.
I have one tomorrow night,
Yeah.
and I have one on Thursday. Yeah, you can actually. The vehicle for hire licensing board meeting. We moved it out of two so that we could have a bigger deliberation on another. So
You're so sweet.
yeah.
Do you go to every city council meeting?
This was.
Yeah, just the ones that DPW is involved in, which is every council. Thank you.
Haircut looks sharp.
You like the circles on my eyes.
I thought that was a lighting in your shit.
And it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
you gonna speak today?
We're gonna get them around about it. I got your request about your.
Yeah, that's unfortunately, that's coming up a little later, but you can speak about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think the airport, do we have a lot of people online that want to speak? Two. And then we have.
I'm right now.
7, that's not too bad.
Okay. Hang in there, right?
Yeah, we just need, we know that, Counselor Paul's gonna be late, she said she'd be here about 5. And so we're just waiting for Counselor Burns.
Yeah, Gene's one of vice president.
Yeah.
How's he coming in by, by
No, I
Zoom?
think he's coming here, and here he is now.
Okay, there he is.
I believe in what you're trying to do, and yes, you have a policy about the building the future, and I don't want to piss other people off. So, we'll find a way to make it work. I just have to build a schedule, so it's not.
It's really hard. I mean, the city market used to mean the city market and the new community room, but the community room. We have.
Hey, there's our quorum.
There's your quorum.
Yeah, you
How are you?
stand.
All right, oh, man died today, so that's always exciting. It was,
So it's like.
it's coming, yeah, right, soft coming out.
Later in the day.
Right, so I went, it was there. That's.
Yes.
I mean, those guys.
Everything is.
They always.
It's just
Thank you also. Because
I know,
So, the point is,
This is just,
well,
yeah, I think for it.
as long as it's got around.
Yeah.
Schedule.
It's okay, and it was good work, yeah. But that's, you know, he lived a good life. He agreed, yes. Dark night is done.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So you know this guy.
No, I got some.
It's good, so I.
Yeah.
All this work stuff.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
I can't think about
I think
that.
I saw that.
Well, actually, it's the first one, which is critical, is, this is, she doesn't mind sitting on the panel, so. She's been organizing all the stuff. And I would get that. Saturday, yeah, trying to escape. So they called us, I don't know, 6, 7 o'clock night to say, you gotta come, he's like in the middle of the hall and he's not moving. Next way, so we went.
I like,
Hello.
How are you? The absolutely, it's, you know, I.
You do some great stuff the hallway.
There you go. Locked in his head, how to get out, so he did, it was good. So that's, yeah. It was better. Timing is. So, but thank you. Thank you. Andy.
I mean,
Hey, Andy.
Whenever you're ready, we'll. We just need to get your in here.
Throwing it.
Yeah.
Crap.
How are we doing on technology? Are we in good shape?
In what sense?
We got,
In the existential sense?
In the best matter.
feeling like it's all over the place.
But thank you. I was not specific.
We're rolling.
All right. And we're recording. Great.
That's what.
Okay, I think we're gonna kick it off.
Kick it.
I'm gonna go ahead. You'll be there by the
Good, yeah,
time. we're-
I'm here.
Okay, I'm gonna call to order the Transportation, Energy and Utility Subcommittee of the City Council at 5:07 PM. And the first item on our agenda is the agenda. I'll entertain a motion on that.
I would move the agenda as stated on the paper that we have here, which I assume is the most up to date.
And I'll second that. Assuming we're both in favor, so.
Yeah.
Consider that passed. Then I'll entertain a motion on the minutes from our previous meeting.
I will move to accept them. I have to be honest and say I haven't read them, so. We'll assume that nothing in there is incorrect.
I did, and they looked correct to me.
There you go. I will trust you.
And so,
So I will move the approval of those minutes.
okay. We'll second that and we'll assume that that's passed as well. And the next item on our agenda is public forum. And so we have some folks that are here to speak and some folks online. So we'll start with the people here. And the first one is Catherine Bach. Hi, Catherine. You're welcome to join us at the table or speak from your chair. Okay.
I want to speak on the F-35. And I'm not going to throw a bunch of facts at you because you know them better than I do. But I think it's a horrible reminder for me and probably for a lot of other people, but my parents survived the Holocaust, came to America, and I grew up with seeing my mother be terrified of airplanes, especially ones that look like military airplanes. And when I see them and hear them going over me, it's sort of a reminder of how terrible war is and how I would really like to be able to stop war, but of course I can't. But that basing a plane like this in a large city is something that should not be done. And according to what I've heard, the city of Burlington could still change that and have them sent somewhere else. But I don't know if that's true. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Next is Andy Simon. Sure.
That's all right. My name is Andy Simon. I am here officially as a member of the Ward 5 NPA Steering Committee to urge action on the resolution that our NPA passed in this very room unanimously on February 16th. That resolution, which I think we have, was addressed to City Council and Public Works Commission and asked that the new Shelburne Street roundabout be named the Tony Reddington roundabout in honor of that intrepid Burlington advocate for roundabout who died last year. Unofficially, I am here to tell you that Tony did not care that much for symbolic gestures like this renaming, although I think it's still a good idea. And also to let you know that without a doubt, Tony's ghost will haunt incessantly all city, state, and federal transportation planners, as well as local decision makers like you, if this turns out to be the last roundabout built in Burlington. Though I suspect that your committee mostly hears about the complaints, everyone I talk to loves the new roundabout in our neighborhood. What they don't know is that most roundabouts would not entail relocating and rebuilding so many underground utilities, or would not require moving so much contaminated soil from all the gas stations. They don't know that most roundabouts would not take 3 years of disruption to construct. As a former transportation planner himself, Tony had a deep appreciation for the elegance and efficiency of roundabouts as a tool for moving traffic across the land. He knew from extensive study that the safety of pedestrians, cyclists, and motor vehicle drivers is enhanced by using roundabouts in place of traffic signals. However, Tony's core motivation was a belief in justice and in equity. He cared about the safety of communities who are often forgotten or valued by planners. He knew that these are the people in our city who most often walk, bike, and live on the busiest, oldest streets. So yes, please move ahead expeditiously with the designation of the Tony Reddington roundabout, recommended by Ward 5 and Ward 2 and 3 NPAs. But after that, what will you do to become advocates for Tony's vision of Burlington? How can you lead to make sure that many roundabouts sprout up all over our neighborhoods as symbols of prioritizing the safety and health of all our residents? What are the roundabouts that are already planned for our streets? North Avenue, Colchester Avenue, and how can you move them forward? What about Pine Street, Lakeside Avenue, Pine and Maple, Pine and Queen City Park Road? With all the other demands on you, I hope that implementing this vision can become a priority for the City Council. Let me know how I can support you. Thank you for your service to the city.
Thanks, Andy. Next, we have Andrew Champagne.
That's a tough act to follow, I'll tell you that. Hey, everybody. Hey, Chapin. Hey, counselors. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Andrew Champagne. I live in Ward 2, soon to be Ward 3. I was on the NPA steering committee with Mr. Reddington from 2013 to 2019. And Tony was a 1 in a million guy. He was real an old North End guy. He was a character, but he was always for the working man. I don't believe in the last 10 years or 12 years of his life he had a vehicle. Tony was a graduate of Norwich University. He started working for the state of Vermont, and he had his first introductory meeting with the governor, and that was scheduled at 1 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963. And as he waited in the waiting room, the governor came running up the stairs with the news that the president was shot. So I always think of that, and I want to put that in the record. He was also an employee of the state of New Hampshire. Tony was also a journalist, a newspaperman, a public policy kind of wizard. And he's the one who talked me into being on the steering committee. My friend Fauna Hurley was pregnant with her first child, and she asked me to be on it, Tony. But Tony did not have a bicycle, and he always had this interest in roundabouts. And the first roundabout I ever saw in Vermont was the one on the Barry Montpelier Road. I think you all know that one. And I think there's one down in Brattleboro, but that was about it. The most I had ever seen was in Massachusetts, and where I grew up in Connecticut, there was no roundabouts. So Tony was always pushing the roundabout, always pushing bike lanes, always for the people. He lived very simply. His idea of fun was coming up with a very complex project that we could present at the MPA. Now, our MPA is a truly wonderful thing because all the MPAs, we serve a hot vegan fresh meal at every meal at no cost. So sometimes we had up to 125, 140 meals. And Tony was the catalyst to getting funds from the city. And he was also, he knew so much about Vermont history and the procedure of Vermont government. I think the Reddington roundabout would be so fantastic. And I can just see him riding his bike. I rode my bike here. And I can just see him off to another meeting or calling a friend or, just helping someone. He was a very kind person. Andy gave you very eloquently some more technical details about Tony, but he really loved the Queen City. And I believe that President Paul is not here. Hopefully she can see my remarks. And Councilor Bergman will attest the Wards 2 and 3 NPA is really a wonderful event, really community event. And that's a lot in part to Mr. Tony Reddington. And I miss him, and I think it would be a really cool thing. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Welcome.
Are you Jody?
I am.
Were you here to speak at public comment?
I am, although my comments are really more directed toward the airport issues. And so I'm wondering, will there be an opportunity to talk then, or should I talk now?
There can be time allowed, so you're welcome to speak now or speak then, sure.
Well, I guess I prefer to wait for Mr. Longo's presentation.
Okay.
If that's right with you.
Fair enough. Are there folks online?
There are a few people online. I have one person with the raised hand. Anyone else who wishes to speak can raise their hand. Erica, I'll allow you to unmute yourself now.
Hi, thank you. My name is Erica. I used to live in the Old North End, but now I'm in Heinsberg. I wanted to comment though and come today because I wanted to speak about the F-35 problem and the emissions problem. I don't know that I'll be able to stay long enough to comment after Mr. Longo's presentation. So if it's okay for me to share my comments now, I would just want to share a couple of things that mean a lot to me about this issue. I certainly hear them in Heinsberg where I am, and I hear them anytime I'm working at the University of Vermont with students. I hear them all the time. And for me, they bring up a lot of really painful memories and things that I've experienced abroad when I've witnessed the US military's violence towards folks in my traveling. I have people all over the world that I really love and care about who are victims and survivors of these weapons of war. And every time I hear them, I'm reminded of friends back home who are, actually experiencing what these planes can do to civilians and to people beyond just the noise that they are causing for us here and the emissions and environmental issues they're causing to us here. They're also causing violence abroad, and they have the capacity to carry nuclear weapons. These are not things that we should have anywhere near Burlington, and they're really not things that we should have anywhere in the world. Because I am anti-war. I think that's important for me to say that because I've met so many people who've been directly impacted by the US military's decisions. And I also just want to name that, just beyond that they're having an impact on the environment. I'm somebody who, I'm about to be a parent. I don't want my children to have to face what they're going to face with the environmental crisis, that I don't even know how I'm going to like promise them that there's a future. I don't even know where to begin to fight for them and how I'm going to encourage them to fight. But I just need to say that like the environmental impact of these planes, I mean, the F-35s are, you know, it's about 2.37 gallons of fuel for every mile traveled and around 1,340 gallons of fuel per hour. This is just like, you know, it's egregious. It's impacting our environment. You know, it's like the equivalent of 28 metric tons of carbon dioxide. They're like heavily polluting our air and our water sources in the US and abroad. And they're impacting Burlington's environment and our water and our air. And so for those reasons, I'm really asking that we be thinking, you know, obviously about the emissions and what this is doing to what the air we're breathing and to our bodies with the sound and what it's doing to our eardrums and our children's eardrums. But also like beyond that, just that we remember what these planes are doing abroad to children and innocent civilians, because they are weapons of war that are dropping bombs on people. So I think I'll end my comment there. You know, like beyond that, I just want to just also, I mean, really quickly just mention that, again, I'm talking about as far as like children go, like there's been so many studies where they've found that this can cause like preterm or low birth weights, delayed speech development, hearing loss, interference with concentration, long-term memory, reading, math, stress hormones, anxiety, PTSD, asthma, cancer, heart disease, stroke. Like this is no joke. And like I said, I'm about to be a mother, and like I just can't imagine what this is going to do to my child and my family and myself and to many children all over the world. And so I think this should just be seriously considered about if we want to be supporting something like this in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Dan, I will unmute you now.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Dan.
Oh, we lost you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about airport stuff and aviation stuff as well. And want to echo the sentiments just expressed that I'm a dad and come to this work because I care about my son and care about the world. So some comments on the emissions report. First is on processes. So this report was asked to be done 4 months ago, and then it wasn't posted until about 24 hours ago. And I think, you know, because I messaged Mr. Longo and the committee members, don't know if it would be up and haven't had a chance to analyze it fully. And I know other people haven't because it was just posted. So just hope that it can, you know, stuff like this can be posted earlier in the future. Second, I brought this up at City Council last night too, but just want to again highlight the behavior of the Airport Commission on February 1st. Not only planning for decades of airport expansion, but I don't know how to pronounce last names, but it was Commissioner Robin G, who made a joke about selling snow to Sugarbush because of the climate emergency. Just want to remind everybody that airplanes melt snow and cause climate change. And then Commissioner, again, don't know how to pronounce last name, but Helen R, making a comment about it'll be Nick Longo's retirement by the time all the homes are outfitted with noise mitigation. And at the current rate, that's 52 years from now. And so that's 2075. And just how mean and cruel those comments are. The pain and suffering, not only of the climate emergency, but of noise. And so I would ask Mr. Longo to apologize on behalf of the Airport Commission for those remarks, because they're supposed to be stewards of the airport. I also want to say that the report doesn't include the non-CO2 heating effects of aviation. And so in particular, this is the creation of contrails and aviation-induced cirrus. And so water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and it's not included in the report. So it does not fully capture all of the heating impacts of burning jet fuel in the sky. And I'd also like to have a number on biofuels. So that's not in the report at all, and that's often used by the aviation and fossil fuel industries as greenwashing, basically saying, look at these planes. But if we could just get a raw number on how many gallons of biofuel is used compared to all of the jet fuel at Burlington International Airport, that would be great. And then I think 2 asks basically is we can't expand the airport forever, and that's the plan. We need to degrow aviation. There are a lot of flights that we can not have, and the luxury emissions would not exist. So these are things like private jets, private aircraft, getting rid of the F-35s, flights to Rutland, flights to Plattsburgh, discovery flights put on by Vermont Flight Academy. These are recreational flights. These are all emissions that we don't have to have. And we need to immediately degrow the aviation sector and not just plan for decades of expansion. And then finally, I think this is an ask, Councilor Bergman and Barlow, for both of you, but if the city council or the mayor's office could just officially recognize that the net zero energy roadmap is flawed because it doesn't count the airport. We have a number now, it's 120,000 metric tons. Again, that's from the airport, and we have to analyze it further, but there is a number. And the city of Burlington owns and operates the airport, and it's not in the roadmap. So any talk about net zero by 2030 isn't actually true because the airport is not part of it. So those are all of my comments, and thanks for listening. And thanks for your work.
Thank you, Dan.
James?
Okay, hello. So I'd like to also make some comments about the report that was posted yesterday. I think in some ways it's good, but in some ways it falls short. It relies on fuel that's dispensed at the airport, which is not the standard way that this has been measured in the Excel spreadsheets I've seen for aircraft emissions. You know, and then even for the fuel dispensed at the airport, which is probably somewhat related to the emissions, but it does not, even though it breaks down by aircraft type, how many operations there are at the airport. And I think an operation is a takeoff and a landing. So for each, okay, so we know the number of operations, but we don't know the fuel used for each of these four categories: air carrier, air taxi, general aviation, and military. What about including the fuel dispensed for each category? But fuel dispensed isn't really what's the accurate way to do this. If you look in the Excel spreadsheets, you'll see the type of aircraft, the mileage for that aircraft type, then for each destination, the distance to that destination, and the number of flights per year to that destination, and all of that information, the mileage, the distance, and the number of flights, you can calculate the gallons of jet fuel or gasoline used per year for that aircraft type. And then you can add up for all the different aircraft types and all the different destinations, how much fuel is used. And that is the kind of calculation you would expect to get after 4 months of time. What you got in this report is what you could have gotten in an afternoon, maybe less than an afternoon, because the amount of fuel, which is given, I think, on the amount of fuel, which is 11 million gallons of jet fuel and 100,000 gallons of avgas, is something the airport had readily available. So why did we need 4 months for this kind of a report? We really anticipated getting a report that was fully accurate, that was detailed, that showed for each kind of aircraft what is the information and the emissions to at least to the next stop of that aircraft. Or if it was returning like the F-35 for the full flight of the F-35. This is not an acceptable report and it should be rejected. And a demand is to Nick Longo to provide a real report by tomorrow or by next week. We shouldn't have to wait another 4 months for such an inadequate report. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Hey, do we have others? No? Did you either, you want to speak at public comment? Not required, right?
So this is Dominique and.
Oh, they're here, they're here.
Yes, with
Okay,
VHB,
understood.
yeah.
Got it, okay. Is there anyone else? No? Then I will go ahead and close public comment for now. I know Jody had a question that she'd like to, or a comment she'd like to make after
Well, I
the,
just, as long as I have time.
Yeah.
After Mr. Longway's presentation.
okay. So the next item on our agenda is the Colchester Pearl intersection. I see Laura's joined us. Councilor Paul has joined us as well.
Yes, thank you. My apologies. I had a meeting at 4:30, so
We knew you
it
were.
was, I'm here as quick as I could.
Hi, I am here to speak to both items 4 and 5. I will use item 4's time to really review the program. We're joined here today by Christine Ford of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Burlington applied under this new program by the state of Vermont called VPSP2 is the acronym. That stands for, oh man, Vermont, I don't have, for some reason, the right part in front of me.
Can I jump in, Laura?
Sorry, I got it now.
It stands for Vermont Project Prioritization and Project Selection Process.
Thank you. It is quite the acronym. And really my understanding is it got created so that there's various projects throughout the communities, throughout the state that don't quite fall under what was VTrans's typical buckets for funding. They weren't quite safety qualifying. They aren't quite functionally deficient yet. But they're ones that were necessary for other means. And so this new selection process was created. The City of Burlington applied through the CCRPC or identified projects through the RPC in March of 2021. From that process and different selections, we were notified this past summer, fall, that 2 of our projects that we submitted for had been selected to move forward into this project scope refinement process. And so that's where we are today. We are taking a look at 2 of our projects and what the City Council selected preferred alternative is. The report and work that is done today is reviewing the scoping efforts that already happened, checking that the estimates were thorough, that the public process was thorough, and that where these different alternatives landed. The benefit that Chittenden County has is that we have the CCRPC. We have a very robust support system in developing these alternatives and these processes. There's other communities around the state that don't quite have that advantage, either in their time, their resources, or their community. So while this process has felt a little redundant so far, especially for one of these intersections that has been recently selected as a preferred alternative, we have to remind ourselves that this is the state's process to be able to bring projects forward to them that have a robust background and understanding in what the scope is going to be as the state of Vermont accepts it into their program and starts to allocate their funding. Christine, do you have anything to add on that kind of summation of where we are?
I think you did a great job.
Okay. So with that, the first intersection on the agenda is the Colchester Pearl Prospect intersection. And I am going to make sure I have the right one on my screen when I show you screens. just so that we have a visual. And basically this is the image from our memo, which is a little bit blurry. I apologize. The image is borrowed a few times. But it is realigning the preferred alternative as selected by the City Council in June of 2014 at completion of the scoping study, is to realign South Prospect, which is this north-south road, with Colchester Ave and Pearl Street. This intersection, there's 4 different streets that converge because North Prospect is actually north of this intersection, but it is taking the existing alignment of South Prospect and shifting it to the west to realign this as a 4-way intersection. There was a few different alternatives that were reviewed in this location. There was also some short-term quick build kind of recommendations made, to which the city has implemented to have the intersection functioning better than it currently is. But it is still a constraint within the city. It is one that limits development, as this intersection takes traffic even from downtown developments, and even as far away as Cambrian Rise becomes a limiting factor. So what we look to do as part of this project refinement process is VTrans has asked for a letter of support from the municipality to be able to acknowledge that the process and rechecking the process right now still aligns with the city's visions and goals for this intersection, and they ask for a confirmation of the preferred alternative. So what we seek tonight from the TEUC is sponsorship to address this with the full city council at their earliest convenience. And I will stop sharing so you can may ask questions.
Are there questions from councilors?
So Laura, if the preferred alternative is that alternative 1? Is that what the preferred alternative on this one is?
Correct. It is alternative 1, which is a signalized intersection and realigned with the distinction between 1 and 2 is that there's only 2 northbound lanes, not 3.
And the difference in cost is $60,000, but
in 2014 dollars.
$2014, obviously cheaper now. And could you just summarize why, with the exception of taking out the money, why this is a preferred, the preferred alternative? And just to be clear, because we had a conversation about roundabouts earlier in public forum, there is a roundabout alternative in this, which is significantly cheaper. But so could you explain the choice there?
Yep. The process was before my time here. So I want to speak to what we discussed actually as we confirmed that DPW's recommendation of the preferred alternative number 1 was still our understanding and our guidance towards you. The biggest difference, in my opinion, it comes with even actually more recent roundabout analysis. And it's fundamental to the volume of pedestrians that will use this intersection. And so inside of roundabouts, even though crossing distances can be shortened and the pedestrian is supposed to be considered king, the pedestrian will lock up most heavily traveled roundabouts. There is a critical ratio between the number of pedestrians and the number of vehicles that can cross. And the challenge is, in this location, the volume of students using this with the proximity to UVM will essentially lock up the traffic pattern. And then therefore promotes other bad behavior. There's other concerns with how close this roundabout does come to some of the UVM's historic buildings that I'm not sure was fully elaborated in the report. While UVM has been cooperative with the understanding of the other land taking for the preferred alternative, this would be a different conversation.
And the
Um,
preference between 1 and 2, just to be clear, with the non roundabout alternatives.
Essentially, it's just slightly smaller footprint, which keeps the crossing distance on South Prospect shorter. With realigning the intersection, you get a much better operation between the north-south than you do with its current offset, where we have, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the word, Chapin.
Split phasing?
Split phasing. Thank you. I was going to call it staggered, and that wasn't right.
Yep.
Could you repeat that?
Split phasing for the signals. The cycle is such that it's inefficient having the north and south approaches on separate cycles. And that really enables us to reduce the footprint of the intersection over what is today and get more throughput. So it's that win-win of having a smaller intersection, it's more efficient.
Yep. Thank you.
I'm happy.
Councilor Bell, do you have questions?
I was looking up, I was trying to find
Email?
the question. Mostly because it was asked by, I just don't remember the exact, it had to do with the major versus minor. The item that Barbara Hedrick had mentioned. The minor versus major collector, the urban the categorization. And she did later go and text or email us. I don't know if she emailed you as well.
I don't think so.
The part in the VTrans code where that information came from. So she's requesting, and I would ask that that be put into the memo so that there's a clear indication that the major artery stops at Main Street in South Prospect. And I will find that. I'm gonna be able, did you know where that email is, where she puts the,
Right here.
and she puts the, not that one, the one where she puts the, she tells us the code, is that where the link is to the VTrans thing?
There's another one. So the link is in,
It's in the next one.
so okay,
Remember,
yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I'm trying to think of who got it here. So Laura got it and Philip Peterson got it in terms of DPW.
Yeah.
This is an email from Monday at 6:56 a.m. Subject link to VTrans 2020 City Map.
Here it is.
And the request that she made.
It's just that it become a minor collector route as opposed to a major collector route. And she gave us the link of where she found that.
Great.
So,
It would be. Just trying to make sure I have the thread. Councilor Polly, I think you shared the one that has the thread. The one with the map is very vague as to what the question was, so.
Just shared the thread with you and with Philip. Because you weren't the email, I do not believe, or.
Yes, Laura was not on the thread.
Okay, thank you.
So the request is just to include that information.
yeah, well, she had wanted to amend, I shouldn't say, she wanted to make a correction in the memo that mentioned minor versus major.
Okay, yeah, and we certainly have time between when the next council meeting that we would show up in mid-April to be able to get that updated. It is just a draft of the project review. So we certainly have that opportunity. And we will review that with the CCRPC about the road categorizations.
If there's any need, I would support that as well.
So is there a motion on the sponsorship to bring this to city council?
Go ahead.
No, I move to accept the staff recommendation for alternative 1 and with the change in the memo reflecting Barbara Hedrick's request in her email. And is there anything else that you need from a motion? No.
Nope.
Well, then I won't make any more.
So you've sent that
Mark sent.
PDF that we got that shows that little small change.
I sent the first email.
This is
from Barbara.
this is the one I'm talking about that shows this. It's a PDF where she wanted to put it in red. It's a very small change.
It's attached to that.
Right, yes,
It's attached to
yes, it
that.
was.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So it's unanimous. So we'll recommend that. And with that, we'll move on to the next intersection in the VPSP2 work, which is Colchester Barrett intersection.
Yes. So similar process. The city was also selected for our application under the Colchester Riverside Barrett Mill Street intersection improvements. I should know under the last one, and we can review it with the city council on this one as well. Right now, this is being identified under VTrans's safety program for funding, which comes at 100% of the capital costs, less any non-participating items such as soils or things that the city adds on that we would pay for during the project's scope. That could change as things get refined, but right now that's the program that it's tracking with VTrans. So I will share my screen again. And I apologize, my dog is barking at a delivery truck if you hear him in the background. So to orientate everybody, we have Colchester Ave, continuing across the bridge into Winooski, Mill Street, Barrett, and then this is actually the realigned Riverside. This is also alternative one inside of the study as the preferred alternative. There was an alternative looked at that had a slip lane that came across really to honor the strong movement between the Winooski, city of Winooski, and then down Riverside, not really found to be a desirable intersection configuration. A roundabout was also reviewed here, but with the volume of traffic, the pedestrians, the geometry, and the grade of this road, that is a really challenging intersection to construct or maintain. But I do have the actual study open on this one, so I could scroll down and show that if that's something that everybody's interested in. I do want to highlight.
You get to page 10, which has got all the criteria on it, please.
I don't have the report up, but I have, this was alternative 2, which has the very creative slip ramp. And then this is the alternative 3, the roundabout in this location, which is not exactly round in the circulating traffic. I was going to highlight that this particular project that we are discussing is very specifically the intersection, the Winooski Bridge replacement project, which the city was awarded jointly with VTrans and the cities of Winooski a RAISE grant for, is a totally separate project that we will talk to you about when that project is ready to kick off. So they're very proximate projects, but they are 2 individual projects.
I think it's probably worth noting, Laura, some of the challenges when we were engaged in this one is the large amount of retaining walls and likely taking of one of the residential structures on the uphill side that Laura's pointing to. There's retaining walls on almost every side, and the multi-lane roundabout doesn't have quite the same benefits as the 1-lane roundabouts from a pedestrian safety standpoint. And all of those considerations, I think, led us to realizing that the other alternative 1 was strongly the preferred alternative in the process among the advisory committee.
Laura, could you please bring up that other the document, because it contradicts what Chapin just said. Page 10 is the page.
I'm gonna stop.
No, it's 10 of 12, page 10 of 12. Not totally contradicts, to be fair.
The matrix, right?
If you call it that, I don't know what. Figure 4, alternatives evaluation of matrix, yes.
Yep.
There we go, I got there. There we go. I don't know. I'm trying not to interrupt. So. It's always hard.
So. Which part would you like?
I mean, my comments are, this is the roundabout, it has the best improvement of pedestrian safety. It's got the most reduction of potential crashes. It's got the managed peak hour congestion. It's got this, it's better, it's a better than obvious, I think probably the no build or the short term improvement. So it's not as good as the complexity. I don't know that given safety as being the issue, that I don't understand how that's broken out. And it provides very similar bicycle connectivity. I understand that it's got right of way impacts and historic resource impacts. It's got the same stormwater. It's got the same net change of on street. It looks like, and it's got the same aerial utilities. It is more expensive, but this is a long-term capital expenditure. So when I think about it in terms of all of those things, particularly the crashes and the pedestrian safety and the similarity of bicycles, and as somebody who goes in that intersection lots, I just lay it out. I support a roundabout here, and that is actually absent something which should have been in this matrix to begin with. I would not support either of the other two alternatives. No, not a question, but a statement.
The number 3 means that did the house have to be?
You got to remove it.
I mean, you literally have to remove the house, 4,000 square foot house.
Yeah.
Laura, I can't remember what the 4F resource that's impacted under the roundabout. Do you recall?
I don't.
Do you have more questions, Councilor Ball?
No, I mean, I would prefer to. I would prefer to go with, these are long term. I just don't know what's involved in removing a house. I really have no idea. We're talking
Probably
about,
$3 million.
I mean, I know the last thing, this, well, it wasn't just the cost, it's also the time. I don't know, is that going to take 10 years of litigation to do something like that? I know how long it took to do another project. It was not even remotely that major in terms of removal. It's pretty significant.
I have a question around cost. It's not just more expensive, it's twice as expensive, to be clear. And I'm wondering if what year these dollars are stated
This would
in?
have been in 2019 when the city
2019.
council selected alternative 1 as the preferred alternative.
In approximately, what do you project the Burlington share of these might be? I mean, would these be subject to cost sharing with?
At
state?
the moment, there's no cost share. V-Trans funds their highway safety improvement program at 100%, which is where this project was trending under its application.
No matter which project, no matter which alternative is chosen?
That's my understanding. But we would have to go back and reopen the scoping study, is my understanding, Christine, to be able to look at a different alternative.
Yeah, I think that the safety projects have to have a cost benefit analysis done. And I don't think that this was done with this project previously. So there is some consideration of cost, and it would have to be reevaluated, I would think. And I think just, so this process, this VPSP2 process has accepted this project. And while there could be some adjustments to it, it doesn't account for going back to scoping. So it's uncertain what would happen then. I don't want to make it sound like you have to choose what you chose all these years ago. But just to be clear, I mean, what was submitted was this project. So in terms of re-evaluating, we're uncertain where that would leave this project.
I'm confused. There are 3 alternatives that were studied. Isn't that this project?
No, the 3 alternatives come from the concluded 2019 intersection scoping study completed by Stantec. From that scoping study, the city submitted the city council's alternative, I might get it wrong, maybe January of 2019. I'm sorry, it was in our communication. March of 2019 is when the city council accepted staff's recommendation of the preferred alternative as the city's finding to conclude the scoping study. So we've already done the scoping. There's already been public process, which is what Chapin was speaking to. From that, we applied for that specific preferred alternative project to the state of Vermont. What Christine is saying is that if we as a city do not have the same finding currently, we have to pull the project from our application, ask the CCRPC if during whatever review period we become eligible, we might reopen said scoping study, have a new public process, have new processes, then reapply to V-Trans for a project.
And was this this matrix available to the city council in 2019?
I would have to go back and review the documents. I imagine it was because it's part of the concluded scoping study, but that would have been a project that Nicole Loesch had brought forward to you.
Yeah, all of these tables were in the original scoping study, came from there.
Yes.
Well, personally, I think it was a big mistake in 2019, and I'm glad my fingerprints aren't on it. So my position continues to support the roundabout in this location, understanding all of these complications. Like we should, I think that this is the right way to go. And if we made a mistake previously, I don't need to stand by that mistake. So.
Could I just ask, was this called the Main Street Winooski Bridge scoping study?
No, that is the other project that we have the grant on now.
All right, I'm not seeing anything in March of 2019 that came to the city council, so I need to know when that was. And it would have come to TEUC first.
Can I make a much less technical comment quickly?
Yes, I have a question I'd like to pose in relation to this, and then we'll allow Andy's comment.
Oh, actually, I take that back.
Okay.
It's, I'm sorry, I found it.
Great.
And it is in March of 2019.
I was at the same meeting. Yes.
I have a concern that right now this is on the list. It's gotten sort of preliminary approval and it's on the list, right? And we're just, this is like, what we're doing here is sort of, you know, showing that the council still supports this as a project going forward. If we reopen this, I think we introduce a lot of uncertainty around the future of this project. Is that accurate? Or is there a way for us to ascertain that ahead of making our decision here? Like, is there a way to know? You know, do we go to the back of the line again and hope that in you know, future decision making will look favorably still, or is this our opportunity to sort of to get this while we can? If you follow my question, and I know it's a
VPS, yeah, it's tricky, Councilor Barlow. The VPSP2 process is really new to VTrans. This is the first pilot year for intersections. They've done, I think, one round of bridge related projects, and they flop every other year with their review and selection. In theory, if this piloting project selection is successful, there would be future opportunities. But I can't speak to where the program is. It's pretty new.
Laura, do you want to just speak? I think it's helpful for the committee to understand how the Winooski Bridge project and this project may interrelate, and how keeping this project, if I understand, progressing in a timely manner may benefit the city in terms of overall funding for the bridge and this intersection.
Yep. So with the bridge project, the proximity of this intersection has been acknowledged to be both a complication as well as a potential advantage. VTrans is generally prepared, and I'm speaking on a few of their behalfs based on our meetings, to have this intersection project be absorbed into the collective work with the bridge so that both projects can advance on a design and construction process simultaneously. Both designs would be able to relate to each other, they would inform each other, and they may have the advantage of being able to be constructed alongside each other. It is the one plus of moving this process forward at this time.
Just in case anyone is interested, it was on the March 25th, 2019 meeting. The motion was made by Max Tracy. The resolution passed unanimously.
Allow it if it's short, just because we're
Very
behind
short,
right now.
I'm sorry. I have all the respect in the world for the expertise that's involved here and the constraint. I just want to say that a number of years ago, Director Spencer made a statement in a public meeting that Burlington is bullish on roundabouts. And I want to say also that we had a meeting in this very room a number of years ago about the St. Paul Street intersection, where many alternatives were discussed in terms of public input. And the decision by the public present largely turned on the fact that we would have to lose Shy Guy Gelato at that point if we were to turn that into a roundabout. Shy Guy is gone, the building is empty. I know that there are impacts such as losing that house for innovative or changing the configuration of an intersection. And yet, I think that in the larger vision of things, that we should move ahead with that bullish attitude about roundabout. Thanks.
Is there more question or comment from committee members?
I'd like to find out what's involved and get more information. If we don't have to, this decision does not have to be made today. Is that right?
It doesn't have to be made today. We could certainly move it forward to an April TEUC. And collect as much more information as we can from VTrans to answer some questions. We could also discuss it at the council.
I would be in favor of that. Well, I think the point of having committees is so the committees can do that work. So I would prefer, if it was my decision, I would prefer that we do it at the committee level. So postpone this until whatever the date is in April, when we hopefully will have more information so that we know exactly what we can and can't do, what the costs are. I mean, the other thing also is, I mean, I understand that, you know, it costs money. It costs money to figure out how much money something is going to cost. But, you know, it's very annoying to vote on stuff when it's like, this is what it cost in 2018. And we all know that it's going to cost a lot more. We don't know how much more. I don't think it's fair to just simply use a multiplier. And I'd like to know before I vote on something, what it actually is gonna, at least a little closer than 2018. We know the costs have been significantly higher than that. Even if the city of Burlington isn't paying for it and there is no cost sharing, I think we should know a little more accurately than that, unless this is literally how everything gets done and we don't have that option. I mean, if the state says, no, we're not going to do that, well, I guess something we have to live with, but I haven't quite heard that, I don't think.
So you're making a motion to postpone this till.
And that was my long-winded way of saying that, yes.
I would second that and would hope that when staff reaches out to VTrans, that you can do it in a way which does not prejudice a roundabout option, and in fact makes that possibility something that is possible. You know, I'm not asking you to advocate for it as much as I know how bureaucrats can talk with each other to kill projects, right? So I would like that not to be the approach. That here I trust that you'll do it in a fair way so that we can really know. Because if this committee and then the council decides that this is just a better way to go over the course of a very long lifetime of an intersection, then we should have that opportunity. So thank you. I understood. That's my long way of seconding.
The only thing I would add to this discussion is I would ask committee members to make sure that their questions are clearly articulated to Chapin, Laura, and maybe Christine as well, so that we can make sure they get addressed when we take this up again.
Fair enough.
Okay, and then with that, I guess we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of postponing until the April TEUC?
I
Right. Okay, well, thank you
Thank
for that.
you.
Yeah. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, which brings us to item number 6, airport missions. And we have representatives from the airport and from BHP.
Yeah, I think maybe we can
join us.
Yeah, split.
Yeah.
I'll do
Bring this over to Nick. Do you need your presentation up?
Yeah, I think Maddie has it for us. And I'll do a quick round of intros. Nick Longo, I'm the Director of Aviation at the airport.
Larry Lackey, Director of Engineering and Environmental Compliance.
Donnie Gorsko, from BHP.
I'm Megan Red from BHP as well.
So thank you again for having us back. We were here a few months ago, giving a quick update on various projects, this being one of them related to our sustainability planning. Donnie and Megan have been working with us for some time now, and we're eager to present this information, which is a piece of our sustainability plan. This is our greenhouse gas emissions plan. Donnie will get into the details of it, the full scope of the work, because it is more besides the greenhouse gas emissions. I won't take up too much time. I'm going to hand it right over to Donnie to go through the report and the presentation, which was updated today. This is new on the website as of this afternoon.
Sure. All right, thank you very much. So we were here, I think, some months ago, just describing the overall sustainability management plan. This is sort of a synopsis of that plan and the project overview. This, as Nick said, is just one component of the complete set of baseline studies. We're going to be looking at waste management and ground transportation, water resources, as well as passenger experience. As part of the sustainability management plan, the greenhouse gas emissions inventory that we're presenting the preliminary results of today, that is, again, only a part of this plan. Following the development of those baseline studies, we have some work to do, and we've been working over the past, several months on the data collection effort across these baseline studies, not just the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, but the data collection process is and does take quite a bit of time because of the various data holders, and Nick and Larry have found out how difficult the data collection process can be. But once those baseline studies are done, then we'll move into the development with the airport and the stakeholders on developing a sustainability policy to kind of drive the rest of the plan and the direction of the plan, along with some of the goals that relate to that policy and support that policy. Then identifying and evaluating from various perspectives, including cost, including environmental benefits, including social benefits as well, not to exclude the economic benefits to the airport and also to the community as well. The strategies that will help enable the airport to achieve those goals, and then developing an implementation plan that talks about phasing, talks about monitoring and performance tracking, and then at the end of that process, we'll develop that, compile that plan, and then we're providing also to make it to Larry some general assistance survey services along with that as they proceed with their sustainability program. Next page. So the last time we were here, we touched base a little bit on the city's previous climate action plan and the greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the airport that was done as part of that. That only accounted for the vehicle fleet, the natural gas, and the electricity consumption at the airport. That was for 2007 and 2010. A little later on, we have a slide that presents the 2019 results compared to that 2007 and the 2010 inventory findings. This inventory is, one word of caution, it's not necessarily an apples to apples. So we don't know the methodology that was used. We don't know the categorization. We don't know what data was and was not included, but we thought it would be beneficial. And, the results didn't show as, it wasn't as off as one might think in several areas. Electricity is obviously one of those pieces where the city and Burlington Electric have made significant strides. The airport has made some significant strides in their fleet management, consolidation, fuel switching, things of that nature. Some square footage has been increased from the 2010 versus 2019. I think the north and south concourse areas have been added, and that added to some natural gas usage. But overall, there wasn't that big of a difference between 2010 and 2019. 2007 was a little bit, 2007 was a little bit of a different picture. But again, we don't know necessarily what the methodologies were. So this is really just to set some historical context. Next slide. All right, so going into the scopes and sources, typically the inventories are separated into scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is the direct emissions that the airport has direct control or ownership over. That includes the fuel going into their fleet vehicles and the fuel being consumed in their building systems, such as boilers. Scope 2 is the indirect emissions associated with procured electricity, and that's basically where that update between the different PDFs have, that's where the difference is showing. Because we did have a conversation with Burlington Electric that clarified a few pieces for us. Scope 3 is the indirect emissions that are owned by others. That makes up 80 to 90+% of emissions over at any airport, not just Burlington. But those include tenant emissions at the hangars, of their other operations, aircraft activity, of course, the landing and takeoff, the EPU usage, the crews that we talked about, periodically during these meetings. public ground transportation, passengers getting to and from the airport, and then some waste management, wastewater management, the solid waste disposal, things of that nature. So that all falls under scope 3. If you can move to the next slide. So here's sort of a breakdown and a touch point on methodology. So we used the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program and their protocol and their accounting principles as part of our analysis. We use the ACER tool, which is which enables us to give you an apples to apples comparison to other airports. Other airports have been using this. Other airports have been moving toward ACA. Within the industry, there is an ACRP report. I forget what that acronym stands for. Airports Cooperative Research Program. Like I got that right. That is being updated currently, but that previous document was also an input to the analysis. And just a note too, one of the comments that was made before about contrails. Contrails obviously are part, or maybe not so obviously some part of the overall greenhouse gas emissions equation. ACRP, ACER does not account for contrails. It's no standard accounting method as of yet, but maybe as part of an update to the ACRP report, there will be a standardized accounting method for airports. We can account for that moving forward, but we can certainly make mention of the contrails and their related indirect nature to the cruise component of an aircraft activity as part of our forward report. One other note for the ACA, one of our next steps, which we'll get to in just a second, is submission of the application for ACA. And as part of that, the inventory will be verified by an independent third party to make sure that the contents of the calculations and the estimations are correct. And that'll be for just the scope 1 and scope 2 for the ACA application.
I think one of the main changes since our last meeting and this meeting is originally we were only going to study ground operations and takeoff up to 3,000 feet. This report does study the ground operations up to 3,000 feet and the entirety of the cruise to that 3,000 foot mark at the destination airport. So we have included that full flight up to that 3,000 foot mark destination, which was a major change as we move forward since that last meeting.
And so above 3,000 feet, is there anything above 3,000 feet? Excuse me.
No, that's the cruise.
That's the cruise.
Yes, correct. So take off up to 3,000 feet. We separate that out. You're going to see that in just a second. And then everything else to the destination, 3,000.
Landing and takeoff, the LTO that you'll see is up to that 3,000 square feet or below. And then everything above that is the cruise.
And that's accounted for in the charts.
Correct.
Thanks.
Correct. Originally, it was not.
Right.
We did include that.
I appreciate the change.
And as one commenter mentioned, we did use the fuel sales approach, but we did do a diligent effort to go through the aircraft activity, identify what aircraft are being utilized at the airport, and then assign, because every airport and every aircraft is going to have a different sort of engine and technology that generates various scales of emission. So we accounted for that for the aircraft distribution at the airport.
Yeah, and just to build off that a little bit, so the landing takeoff, the stuff that's, local emissions more so in the community, that calculation is based on all the different aircraft types and the movements per aircraft type. So any of those local emissions are, based on those specific engines and things like that. The cruise is what's based on the overall fuel consumption.
So for this, just a quick touch point to get everybody on the same page. So the general equation for calculating emissions is taking the activity data. So, and that is an all-encompassing term. Activity data could be fuel consumption, whether it's diesel or gasoline or anything else. And the consumption of kWh, kilowatt hours, electricity consumption. It could be miles driven for any of the fleet vehicles, any of that, anything that you're doing, or any building system that is active, that is generating emissions, is going to be considered like that's the activity data. And then you're multiplying that by the emission factor. And the emission factors are provided by ACI. And that's just, again, so we can be consistent with how other airports are going to be calculating their emissions. And then that essentially gives you the emissions in CO2 equivalent. So that accounts for the three fundamental greenhouse gas emissions. And again, it does not account for the water vapor, as was mentioned before, but CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide. can go into the results of the analysis.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, it sounds like maybe some of you have taken a look at this, the results of this previously. This slide is getting at, Johnny talked about the different scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 are the direct emissions coming from the airport that can be attributed to BTB. Scope 2 are the emissions that are associated with the purchased electricity that's coming from the grid. And then obviously you can see airport scope 3 here represents 99% of the airport's emissions. And those scope 3 emissions, the airport does not have direct control over, but can influence based on some of their policies and things that they're advocating for in partnerships with airlines and tenants and such. The overall emissions total did decrease since I think the first draft that you saw, it was 120 something thousand metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. It is now 118,538 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent for 2019. And yeah, like you can see here, 1.1% of those emissions can be attributed to the airport directly, and then 98.9% are associated with those scope 3 activities. And so, yeah, I guess, so if the airport were, for example, to look for offsets for their activities, it would be looking at those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions.
And I'll say that the 99% is, for BTV is much higher than you may see at other airports, because other airports, not every airport reports on the cruise emissions associated with your aircraft activity. Most of it is just up to 3,000 feet, and that's what Massport does at Logan Airport, for example. They don't report the air cruise, but some airports do. But because you added that cruise in there, that means that scope 3 emission versus the scope 1 and scope 2, I mean, 1% and 0% seem like, okay, well, why would you focus on the 1 and the 0% at the end of the day if it represents such a small component of the airport's overall emissions profile? But my point is, because we added the cruise, it makes the scope 1 and scope 2 seem a little less significant. Okay.
Yeah, and another change that was made recently today, as we were able to get some utility emission factors from BED. I will get into some of the later slides, but the scope 2 decreased since the previous draft as well, because based on the utility emission factors and the renewable energy that BED is procuring and selling to its customers, that renewable energy profile is allowing us to kind of, offset some of those, or maybe not offset's the right word, but negate some of those AWH that are coming into the airport for electricity.
Next slide.
Yes.
Please.
Okay, so that previous slide was looking at the 3 different scopes. This slide goes into a little bit more detail on the specific sources of emissions based on the different activities that are happening at the airport. Obviously, we've talked about cruise already a little bit. That is by far the largest source of emissions. Obviously on a per passenger basis, that would be, variously comparable to some of these other activities. But yeah, you can see here just the ranked sources of emissions at the airport, and this is scope 1, 2, and 3, all mixed together. The aircraft landing and takeoff cycles that we've also talked about, that will be your second largest source of emissions, and that's the takeoff, the climb out, the approach up to that 3,000 foot number, and then there's also APU emissions, I guess, showing up here, but the third largest one here you'll see is some of the tenant buildings. That's mostly made up of the VTANG buildings that we were able to get data for at this point. But yeah, that gives you a good idea of the various sources of emissions. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, are there other slides where that's broken down? Or is it like in other data, like you were just talking about the guard? And so in their buildings, so, where we can sort of see the impacts of the various components.
That's actually one of our next steps, is to really dive into the overall aircraft activity, which is associated with that, to try to attribute it to some of the different groupings of the aircraft types, whether it's purpose of the aircraft activity, whether it's commercial aviation or general aviation, or if it's military.
Yeah, and in terms of these two, so this, we're looking at all of the categories we looked at. We're gonna look at scope 1 and 2 a little bit more in detail, and then scope 3 a little bit more in detail in some of the next slides. And we'll talk about some of the activity data that went into those calculations. Yeah, so for example, on this slide, this is some of the actual fuel consumption data that played into those emissions values, at least for scope 1 and 2 we're talking about here. So looking at 2019, there were 45,000 gallons of diesel and 2,500 gallons of gasoline used to power airport owned vehicles and equipment. You'll also see a diesel consumption number for emergency power generation units, so generators. You can see the natural gas number here for heating buildings that are owned by the airport, as well as the electricity consumption that's coming from the grid and the solar power that's generated as part of the airport parking garage. And like I said, yeah, so we were able to, you know, based on the utility emission factors, even though that electricity consumption is being used by the airport, it's coming from those renewable sources that are provided by BED. And
I was just gonna say, like, if you didn't have the solar facility on site, then that would be 586,000 kilowatt hours that would have to come from the GMP, for example. So that's, you know, sort of an avoidance of emissions, because what we ended up doing for scope 2 is, and we have to, one of our next steps is to coordinate more closely with GMP, is to understand their emission factor. But as of 2019, our understanding is that they had 94% renewable, but 6% was a mix of other sources of energy or sources. So at that time, if you didn't have the sort of facility, the emissions for the electricity in scope 2 would have certainly gone up.
And yeah, to speak to what Donnie was just saying a little bit, so that purchased electricity, yeah, is that 1% number that has changed since the last iteration of this slide. And you can see that airport vehicles that are running on diesel and gasoline make up 36% of the scope 1 and 2 emissions that are attributed to the airport, and then airport buildings, specifically natural gas consumption for heating, represents 63% of emissions for scope 1 and scope 2. In total, it's a little over 1,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, or for scope 2, for scope 1 and 2 emissions. And like we talked about, those scope 1 sources, it's primarily natural gas, and those airport vehicles, and then scope 2 is obviously coming from the grid. But I guess the point here is thinking about, because the grid is supplied by that renewable energy generation, it just points to the opportunity for thinking about airport vehicles that could potentially be transitioned to electric alternatives, or potentially airport building heating systems that could be, transitioned to electric heat pumps and things like that. And some of the emission reduction potentials that are available there, thinking about new technologies and how we can reduce these emissions that the airport is responsible for directly.
I think as we move forward with some of our development opportunities, whether we're talking about switching our equipment fleet or the actual terminal building, which is our largest building currently at the airport, we have already made some of these changes, and that'll eventually be included in this. It's important for us, and it's important for me to have a formalized plan to move into the future. But at the same time, we can make those transitions, including purchasing all electric fleets, and like our street sweepers and vehicles, airport vehicles, reducing the number of diesel powered vehicles into gas powered if we have to use gas powered. And then, of course, some of our new terminal designs that we just opened up, more efficient, higher energy efficiency, prepared for solar activity on the roof. And as we design the next phase of our terminal building, we also look at geothermal opportunities, additional solar opportunities, to make sure that these things, scope 1 and 2 specifically, the things that we can control and make those policy and development changes on, are incorporated immediately into our future development needs.
I might be thick, but this slide confuses me. What confuses me is the scope 2 emissions are 57% of airport operators emissions. I see purchased electricity being 1%. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
No, that's fair, and that is due to some of the changes that were made to the slide deck today. We must have.
Yeah, I mean, like the other slide said 57%.
Yes.
Right.
So
Apologies, please focus on the pie chart.
this is, it's all good, you know, the moral of my story here is this going to be corrected, or it is in this other.
It'll be corrected in the slide deck.
Great.
Something and everything, but there is going to be a follow-on board, as part of the SMP, the report will be built into the SMP, so there'll be more. Well, it'll be corrected in that, but there'll be more information.
So we can match things up.
Yeah, we're presenting these more so I think as preliminary results at the moment, and then, yeah, they'll be finalized.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this slide is getting at, I think Donnie painted a good picture earlier on just the progression from 2007 to 2010, and then for the year that we're looking at as part of this inventory, 2019. And kind of explain that we don't have access to some of those behind the scenes calculations and methodology that were used for the city's inventory and what played into the 2007 and 2010 methodologies. But obviously we know what we did for 2019 and pulling out these three specific sources: electricity, natural gas, and vehicle fleet, just to kind of, show what that could look like based on the numbers that we had previously from those years, to show some emissions over time. And Donnie already spoke to it a little bit, so I won't go into too much detail. Obviously, the electricity that you're seeing is way down for 2019 emissions, and that is due to the fact that I think BED went all electric, or sorry, not all electric, all renewable in 2014. So obviously that's between that 2010 and 2019 timeframe. And so obviously that's responsible for that sharp emissions reduction there. Natural gas, Donnie spoke to an increase in building footprint that between 2010 and 2019 that could account for that increase. And then vehicle fleet, you'll see a little bit of reduction, and I think Donnie and Nick also spoke to some of those changes that have been made in just some fleet right sizing, being able to take a certain number of vehicles and equipment and downsize into only the number of vehicles that you need for your operations, and combining some of those to get the same job done. Also some fuel switches between diesel to gasoline alternatives, or even electric alternatives in some cases, like the street sweeper that Nick mentioned. And then also thinking about the vehicle and equipment ages that they're dealing with. Overall, it's a younger fleet than the airport had in 2010. So obviously some greater efficiencies there as well with the newer vehicles. Next slide. So like we did with scope 1 and 2, so this slide speaks to some of the scope 3 activity data that played into the different scope 3 emissions categories. And we won't go into each one of these line items specifically, but talking about the various aircraft movements that we use operations data for, and we do have the next slide that goes into the actual operations by overall group. So kind of breaks that down a little bit further. We talked about cruise emissions and how those were based on the jet A fuel and the avgas fuel. There was a question earlier about biofuel or biodiesel. I don't believe the airport uses any diesel for aircraft, and so that was not part of this analysis because that number does not exist. And then we talked about trash and compost and how that's a scope 3 emission source. An interesting fact about the trash that's coming out of the airport is that it goes to the landfill at Coventry. They do have a methane collection system at that landfill that's able to capture around 60 to 90% of emissions that are generated. So that's something to note. And then also some other pieces of activity data that play into scope 3 are de-icing chemicals that are used for aircraft de-icing. There's some fugitive emissions that are associated with that activity. And then when we talk about, some of the vehicles and equipment and tenant buildings and things, a lot of that data did come from butane. So if you see tenant related emissions under scope 3, a lot of those are associated with butane's operations. And so, yeah, like I said, so this is a little bit more of a breakdown of aircraft operations by category, divided into air carrier, air taxi, general aviation, and military. Can highlight here that military 2019 represented about 7% of the total operations for the year. So just thought that was a helpful breakdown to provide. And this shows our scope 3 emissions, kind of similar to one of the earlier charts that we had looked at. You'll see obviously aircraft cruise is the largest emitter. And like we've talked about before, so those cruise emissions are, you know, based on from the after the landing takeoff cycle to the destination. Those full flight emissions are being accounted for here, which you know, speaks to how large of a number you're seeing on all of these graphs. But in total, the scope 3 emissions were estimated to be about 117,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Our total number of emissions for the inventory is around 118,000. So obviously that speaks to how big of a chunk this scope 3 category makes up. But obviously a lot of those emissions are due to the fact that we're accounting for all those aircraft activities, including cruise and landing and takeoff, and APU time, taxi time, things like that.
APU, I'm sorry, is?
Auxiliary power units. It's maybe I'll let the airport folks speak.
So it's an auxiliary engine in the actual aircraft. So when your cabin crew is setting up all the computer systems inside the plane, they're running that generator essentially in the aircraft. That's a policy change that we can make, meaning instead of powering your APU, your auxiliary unit, plug into the electric grid from our jet bridges. We offer electricity at every single one of our jet bridges right now, which uses BED power. Pretty much just the terminal geographic area is BED, everything else is GMP. So that's what that is.
That will be great to understand, not tonight, I don't think, but the policies that you are authorized to adopt and then to employ, you know, in that range, so that, you know, we can have a good discussion about how much better we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, policy, I think, is extremely important. It has been requested to every single one of our carriers to use our jet bridges. Data, I don't know what the data is, but you're right. That would be good to see from that, from 1,466, if I'm reading that correctly, APU aircraft, how we can get that down even further.
I think you both touched upon a point that the S&P, 99% of the emissions are scope 3. Nick is talking about a policy to directly address those. There's a lot of policies and partnerships, projects that could address those scope 3 emissions, even though the airport has limited control, but has influence. So there's a lot of, you know, a lot of the S&P is going to focus on driving down those scope 3 emissions. They're obviously a big piece of the pie.
Yep.
This slide just speaks to, based on, you know, what we just talked about, some of the sources that were not included in these results specifically. These are some of the categories that the ACA program that Donnie introduced earlier can't look at. And then getting into next steps, which Donnie introduced, talking about the sustainability management plan earlier in the presentation, but we do want to take this greenhouse gas emissions inventory and analysis a step further. We do want to refine that procured electricity data from GMP, figure out, some of those utility emission factors, and just kind of refine that process a little bit. We did, as Donnie mentioned, want to identify the percentage of aircraft emissions that are coming from each group. So be able to pull out, for example, those military emissions, flight emissions out of that, you know, cruise number or, you know, landing takeoff number, and be able to say, which aircraft type is contributing to those emissions. And then eventually down the line, we do want to pursue ACA application submission, which includes third-party verification of all of these results. So there will be, a third party going through all of the data, going through all the calculations and analysis, and confirming the methodology that was used, confirming the numbers that we came up with, and really putting that stamp on the process. And like Donnie said earlier, it's a great way to compare apples to apples with other airports.
And one thing on the ACA piece is that the ACA program actually wants you to remove the military missions from your analysis, if that exists at your particular airport, but you've calculated it as part of the overall picture of what's happening, what the activities are.
Could I ask two clarifying questions, just because I missed the.
We'll have another public comment, a short public comment. The time of permitting this, Jody also has a question.
Thank you.
I think the airport's ultimate goal right now is, of course, to finish the sustainability plan with greenhouse gas emissions, and each one of those other elements as part of the plan, waste, water, all of those items. Get those actionable policies in place, get the relationships and any other policy that we need to reduce those scope 1, scope 2, those items that we can't control right now, and continue to work with our partners on the scope 3 reductions, whether that means sustainable aviation fuel at the airport or other alternative fuel sources. I think it's extremely important that we are not alone in this endeavor. This is not just Burlington International Airport. As Donnie said before, and at the request of this committee and members of the public, we were able to include just about the entire flight to the destination, creating that larger number. So they're working with folks like the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, which fuels small engine piston powered aircraft, and the Airlines for America, which is advocating for sustainable aviation fuel, as well as our major legacy airline partners. I think eventually the Burlington Airport can offer that sustainable aviation fuel here rather than fueling up in New York City and flying to Burlington with that SAF fuel. We potentially could offer it at Burlington. That's going to take time. That's going to take a lot of effort on the airline part as well, because this is their fuel. This is not owned by anybody at the Burlington Airport, including our FBO. This is the airline's fuel. So I think focusing on the scope 1 and 2, what we can control, we have a lot of opportunities available to us really now as we start the design on many aspects of the airport.
I'm going to go to councilor questions first so that they're top of mind, and then I'll allow additional public.
I'm always jumping in first, so Karen goes.
I mean, my questions really were just about, the timeline for getting the other information, the next steps, when you would hope to be able to have that. Because clearly there's a keen interest in this, and when you got that,
The last couple slides there, the source is not included. I don't know what the time frame is or the next steps necessarily on that.
Well, I think in terms of the sources not included, that what was meant by that is that we're not including that as part of the inventory.
Right.
So it's not part of the next steps. We were focusing.
Yeah, I wasn't as interested in that. I was more interested in I was more interested in the next steps.
Gotcha.
Continuing data collection. I mean, not sure what that means. How long is this an ongoing? Is that literally an ongoing thing?
Yeah.
Do you then report that data, and how do you report that?
Yeah.
And then you had said that you are breaking it down. It says like aircraft emission per group. So identifying the percentage of aircraft emissions per group, is that something that is obviously that would change, it changes.
Right.
But even just take a snapshot in time.
Right.
When that would actually be able to be available.
Right. The true hope here is to finish this entire sustainability plan this year, probably this summer. Concurrently with this greenhouse gas emissions, we already have been collecting these other goals, water, wastewater, et cetera. So the hope is to wrap this all up with a document, a formal document, a sustainability plan that could be shared, reported to this group or others. And updated, because it is going to change. You're absolutely right. The aircraft have changed. The number of operations have changed. The square footage of the terminal building is changing, which we do not have that data right now, a good chunk of that data. So I think finishing each one of these collections this year, this summer, and reporting on a formalized document is our ultimate goal.
Is it also true that the number of aircrafts that go in and out of BTV that are smaller, they are not mainline, they are older aircrafts, that those are less fuel efficient?
Yeah, you're talking about the regional carriers. Yeah, just like a car, just like some of our older vehicle fleet as well, that we own at the airport. I wouldn't say that the majority of them are. I definitely a larger portion are those regional carriers. Age of the aircraft can be anywhere in the 20+ range. The mainline aircraft or the wide bodies, Boeing, Airbus type names, those are more frequently coming to the airport, and much newer models are being offered. And typically the airframe age is what's reported, not necessarily the engine type or the engine age. So that would be another difficult item to really try to figure out, because a lot of these aircraft have been upgraded with different engine types, including the mainline aircraft that are now operating more frequently at BTV.
Well, I mean, I would think the most important is just simply collecting that information, the percentage of aircraft emissions by group. This is in the interest of transparency. We need to have that out in the public realm. What is it? And I understand that perhaps military don't count in other airports, but they count a lot here.
Yep.
And we just need to identify what they are.
Yep.
The sooner the better.
Yep.
So
okay.
Go ahead.
That's great. So I agree. The sooner we can get more granularity and clarity, the better it will be. And so, you heard some criticisms. I am not in a position to judge their validity, but I think that they should always be taken seriously. And if there is a good answers, like the contrails was, where you're dealing with it in a different way to be able to carry that forward, to be able to explain it. Sometimes you can kill us with too much information. You just sort of bury them. That's a great litigation strategy that very rich people use. I never did that. I never buried people. I defended this a lot.
Let the minutes reflect.
I never did that. I probably should have, but we didn't have enough resources to do that. So, part of it is, I think in relationship to what Karen is saying, maybe getting something sooner in time, even if it's not complete, would be helpful. Whether it is blocking out a big piece here or just having a smaller presentation, just to sort of give an update so that there's momentum. I think part of frustrations are, you have long lengths of time between things, or seemingly long. It is not long for you. 6 months is not a long time to do all this stuff. It's an eon for lots of folks. So trying to keep that balance. I would love to, and it may be part and parcel of this. It may be something that is a next step or a half step, and then that would then be followed up. But the whole question of the policies that we either have in place but are in the process of implementing, and their impact, possible policies, and some out of the box thinking. I mean, you have heard me a lot. You have not necessarily heard me. I mean, I'm doing this for my grandbaby's babies. Okay, they're 3 and 1 right now, right? So I gotta be thinking and hope and working with folks that are out of the box. And sometimes that means laying out, yeah, there's a possibility, but there are these downsides. There are these things we don't control. This is what we can maybe do. This is what we would love to do if we got this permission. The roundabout conversation is something that reveals that, right? I want partners who are going to be really looking to do as much as possible, and then to have those be linked to, so I understand the scope 1, scope 2. Clearly, you do what you have control over. That makes just perfect sense. We all have to do that. We want policies or programs or ideas or incentives or disincentives, however you can do it for those 99%, 98% of things. And again, being out of the box, because our babies really need this. I'm gonna go skiing tomorrow. I want to be able to go skiing like with my little babies for a long time. Right? So we need to keep the snow. That means we need to cut down the greenhouse gases. So that is my request for you as we move forward. Probably it's too long, so summation, shorter term, an interim report, and the starting of the laying out of policies in both in all of those 3 scopes. Thank you.
Before we go to you, Chair, I just have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So sustainable aviation fuel is the reason why, forgive me, I'm a total novice about this, so I'm just gonna ask the question. Is the reason why we don't have it in BTV cost or equipment or both?
Both, for sure, for sure.
So, yeah,
If I could just add, I think it's mostly a supply issue.
The way in supply, yeah.
Yeah,
because it's harder to procure.
it just hasn't been scaled yet.
Okay,
So a lot of the SaaS supplies are on the West Coast, and it's purely no supply on the West Coast.
so when I've looked at, when you go on to look at aviation, taking a trip, there will be a thing on some websites that will show you what the emissions are.
Mhm.
And they'll say, they don't talk about emissions in terms of actual numbers.
Yeah.
They will say favorable.
Right.
Low.
Or typically lower than
Yeah,
normal.
or
Yeah.
lower than, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that the reason they're doing that is because either the equipment, meaning the plane,
Mhm.
or the fact of what the fuel is that's in the plane. Probably more the aircraft.
And
Maybe, I don't know.
probably more the aircraft, and probably even more is the route that it's on. So
Meaning-
the FAA has very specific highways in the
Yes.
sky. And those routes are constantly being updated by the FAA. I know the FAA had a very specific marketing tool that they issued recently about how to approach an airport.
Mhm.
And typically the approach was, and over the history, was you cruise at a certain altitude, then you step down to a certain altitude, then you cruise more. Well, they recently changed a lot of these approaches, not yet at BTV, where it's a slow, gradual
Mhm.
slide, they call it, down to the airport, which is a little bit more fuel efficient. So those types of amendments to the route are also in that number.
That would sort of make sense because was just recently away and I noticed that going into some airports, it is more of a step
Yeah.
process, you go up to like this, you stay at that level, but instead of just dropping a significant amount, you're doing a gradual.
That's right.
approach.
That's right.
So the reason I mention that, is there any, if this aviation fuel is available at larger airports, like JFK, bless you, JFK, I mean, I can't even remember off the top of my head how many destinations BTV goes to. It's a significant number. We're talking Chicago, talking several airports in Atlanta, which is huge airport,
Biggest,
obviously, hugest of the huge.
Mhm.
Is there any incentive that we can give an airline when you negotiate negotiate those things to encourage them to take fuel with them?
Mhm.
Now, I realize that has a lot of implications. I totally understand that. We don't need to get into a discussion about aerodynamics and weight of planes and all that. But is there any advantage, or is there any way in those contracts to giving them any incentive to have better fuel on their plane?
Yeah, I think that's the key word, is that the incentive. How do we write something or think outside that box of writing something in those contracts to incentivize them? Because you're right, requiring them or even hitting certain thresholds or percentages of flights coming into BTV using that fuel would be extremely hard because of the shift in equipment and everything that you just mentioned. But incentivizing them, that's definitely something we can have that conversation with them.
And my last question, the reason I mention this is because I remember the rather phenomenally creative approach that you took to car rentals. And also to the way that you dealt with the airlines. This is what it is. We're gonna cost share X, Y, and Z. If at the end of the year we true up and we owe you, then we owe you. If at the end of the year we true up and you owe us, then you owe us. And that worked. And we didn't lose an airline from that. So, if the relationship is still as good as it was 4 years ago, and employments are still arguably back potentially where they were, I think that should be the priority going into the next round. And I don't remember now how long ago that.
We're negotiating right now. We've been negotiating.
No time like the present.
Yep.
So I would hope that would be the way. And we can't force the airlines to do this, but we can offer them an incentive that may actually be even something that could be copied all over the country.
Yeah, that's a great point. Incentivizing not just their fuel usage, but we've also talked to them in our trying to incentivize as part of this updated contract, what type of ground support equipment they're using. Stop bringing in ground support equipment that uses diesel fuel. There are electric alternatives at airports. Portland, Maine, I just visited there. My counterpart, the director over there, showed me their geothermal fields, their electric ground support equipment that supports their airline fleets. So there are ways to do that, and their recycling plant to recycle glycol or the de-icing fluid for aircraft. Yeah,
which is rather ugly. Okay, I think I've beaten it.
Okay, but just one thing, we got at 5 o'clock or 5:10, we got an email from Pike Porter regarding the report. I forwarded to you, I forwarded to all the committee that didn't hear, so this is part of, this meeting. I forwarded to Maddie and to Chapin, and if you could just address it as you go forward, and not now, right? That's not fair, and we're out of time, but just as part of the ongoing work there, questions related to the F-35s and those emissions. So that would be great. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks for indulging me.
So my questions are, and thank you for that, and thank you for the update and for taking some of the input from the last time you were all here and incorporating it into the plan. The thing around taking the scope 3 emissions, for instance, that was not part of this when you came to us before, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
With regard to scope 3 emissions, I know that you had indicated that most the ACA doesn't require it for accreditation and most airports don't, but some do, right? And the example that I had forwarded to Nick was from Philadelphia. So could you speak to how many airports are actually doing scope 3 emissions and if their profiles look similar to ours?
Yeah, just to clarify, so for the level 1 ACA, ACA is not requiring you to look at scope 3, but as you advance through different levels, then you start to have to report on and track and reduce your scope 3 emissions. So just that particular clarification. And the other clarification is that when I earlier said that many airports don't report it, I was referring specifically to the crews. Many airports don't report the crews, but they do report their scope 3 emissions. They report at various scales. Maybe they're reporting on just their tenant electricity usage. Maybe they're reporting just on the natural gas usage. Scope 3 reporting across different airports is not as consistent as you would probably like it to be. Some don't even go as far as calculating their aircraft activity, although many do. So it's on an airport basis. But the profile for Burlington is, as I mentioned, they're a little bit different than other airports because the scope 1 and scope 2 are so much smaller, particularly the scope 2, which makes the scope 3 seem much more prominent on a percentage basis. Of course, on an absolute basis, it's no doubt huge. But that breakdown, as I mentioned before, scope 3, 80+% of total emissions is generally what we see. And Burlington is 99% at this point. So small on the scope 1, scope 2, but on a percentage basis, scope 3 makes up that difference. So, but like I said, scope 3 is typically 80 to 90+% of that airports.
Okay. And of the scope 3, even though it does include tenant emissions and ground transportation and offsite waste management, the aircraft activity is typically the lion's share of.
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Why doesn't the ACA include military in this exercise?
Just in their application manual, they ask you to.
But I'm just wondering, does anybody know why that is?
I do not know.
I suppose it might be so that they can compare their airport reports, or I guess on an apples to apples basis, but I can't speak to the specific reason of it. I mean, that's just my guess.
Because I did notice that, but it's just curious to me. And then around sustainable aviation fuel, Councilor Paul asked a little bit about it. And one of our commenters, Dan Castrogano, had asked about biofuels. Is sustainable aviation fuel biofuel? Is that basically synonymous?
Essentially, yeah. And from my understanding, SAF is what is commonly referred to as about 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Which is why everybody is. It's huge. SAF. It's huge.
I mean, through its use, it's lower emitting,
Yes.
or because of the processes and.
The life cycle as well. I mean, there's life cycle emissions associated with SAF and there's various ways of creating SAF. They have different life cycles themselves, but yeah, there's significant benefits.
Okay.
From a greenhouse gas standpoint.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything else, and some of my questions were asked by other counselors. So for those who have not spoken already in public comment who wish to speak now, I would entertain that. I know Jody's been waiting patiently.
Yeah, I applaud your efforts at reducing your operations. Greenhouse gas emissions. I think that all of the responsible departments of the city of Burlington are on board with doing that. I think that's fabulous. But I think that in line with Councilor Bergman's advocating that we think outside the box, the big bugaboo is the 98%, right? That is clearly the enormous source of greenhouse gases that we're confronting. and the alternatives, so-called sustainable aviation fuel, that is not gonna buy us much right now, right? And so I work with a group called Safe Landing BTV. And what we are advocating is a reduction by 50% of greenhouse gas emissions from all of the airport operations. And that really needs the planes, right? It really needs the planes. We need fewer flights taking off every day from BTV. That is the only way we're going to address this enormous source of emissions that are coming from the air. And I again, it's hard to figure out all the nitty gritty and all the details. And I appreciate the effort, but you're looking at the 1 to 2%. You're not looking at the 98%. And that's really where we need to go. Amsterdam in the Netherlands is the only airport in the world that has said, we are going to reduce flights. Now, we're going to renegotiate our contracts with all our airlines, and we're going to reduce flights now. And I think, and our organization thinks, BTV should be the first airport in the United States to make that pledge. I think further that the whole idea of the airport being an engine of growth is not substantiated in the data. There are many other ways, if growth is our goal, and I'm not convinced that it is, there are many other ways to achieve that without, certainly without an increase in flights, which I think is what you're advocating. In light of that, in light of our view that we need to reduce flights, I think that the data that I believe the council members had asked for previously is important. It's important to have a breakdown between commercial, cargo, private, and military. And by the way, the 2019 data do not include the F-35s because they weren't here until the end of the year. So that baseline data is a little bit, it's not accurate anymore. Not that it's misleading, it was accurate in 2019. But the data we're looking at as our baseline is really wildly different in terms of today than it was then. So what I hope comes out of this is that the TEUC asks the airport for that kind of breakdown in order to say, okay, what are the obvious things? What's the low-hanging fruit right now? What can we reduce across all of those categories? How can we work with cargo, for example, to encourage them to use rail, which is much more efficient? Those kinds of things, I feel fundamentally is a kind of thinking outside the box. I want to put words in your mouth, but we need to think outside the box now. Not only for our grandchildren and great grandchildren, but for all of us, we need to think outside the box now. And I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing stay the course, let's reduce emissions where, you know, we're going to have a more efficient plow. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the kind of things of the year that we're confronting every day. So I hope that this happens, and it's something that I will be working on in our organization very, very strenuously. Thank you.
I didn't catch the name of your organization. You said it.
Safe Landing
Safe.
BTV.
Okay, thank you. You also wanted to speak here to Chris?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm Chris. I live in Ward 5. Sorry, I couldn't be there. I first had a clarifying question. I'm not sure if there's time for you responded, but just I'm curious if there is more recent data than the 2019 flight data, because like Jody said, and I bet other people are aware that F-35s I believe didn't arrive till September, and they didn't really start flying in earnest until 2020. So I think we would see, you know, a different distribution of the emissions if we were using more recent data, which would be good to know about. And then just generally, I wanted to flag for the council how difficult or some of the problems and stickiness with relying on sustainable aviation fuel. That's like biofuels, like we know. It's you have to just grow hundreds, thousands hundreds of thousands of acres of crops to produce them, and they're kind of suddenly being factored into aviation's plans to reduce emissions around the globe, and it just doesn't add up. Like, it's not a responsible way to use farmland. We already don't have enough of it. I'm speaking as a farm worker for all of my adult life. And so I don't think that is something that BTP should be looking ahead and kind of optimistically relying on it. Instead, I think we need to have a more serious conversation about reducing flights, because like we saw, about 99% of the emissions. And I think there's really equitable and just ways to do that, like thinking about private jets, cargo, things that like most people in town just do not need and couldn't really be bothered by. And then just the last comment about economic growth, and airports historically have been pretty untouchable because they're known as like an engine of regional growth. And I'm not even going to argue whether to the extent that's true, but I think another way to frame that is there's a lot of, it's analogous to having an economy based on like oil extraction or a coal economy, and you need to be thinking about a just transition away from that, not continuing it just because our economy quote unquote needs it. As a young person, that's what I'm thinking about, and it's hard choices. Like, I have flown, probably a bunch of us in this room have flown, but flying is like we forget that it's a privilege, and over 80% of people never do it. It's not probably nearly as necessary as some of the other things we do. And those are just things.
Thanks, Chris.
We do have one person online.
Okay, that was the question that I wanted to ask. Thank you. Could you allow that?
Dan, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi there. I'm not the same Dan that apparently spoke earlier. My name is Dan Batten. I'm coming from Bristol. And just got a minute of comments here. Thank you so much for adding the cruise emissions, the scope 3 emissions. That really makes for a much more accurate and real world report. And I also do appreciate that you're motivated to find ways to reduce scopes 1 and 2 as well. I'd just like to address the phrase "it's out of our control." Too often in the climate change realm, I hear people, kind of throw up their hands and just say it's out of our control. It's somebody else's thing. It's like it's a law of physics. Well, it's not. It was used a lot during the presentation regarding scope 3 tonight. The bottom line is you do have control, or you largely have control over these scope 3 emissions, and not just by encouraging or incentivizing your partners to do things differently. At the end of the day, the easiest and the quickest way to reduce these scope 3 numbers is simply to reduce flights. You can begin doing that by giving up on trying to attract new carriers to BTV. You definitely have control over that. Just stop doing that. Every day you're not talking about reducing flights is a day where I really have a hard time taking any of this sustainability talk seriously. It's nice that you're approaching the 1% and 2% there at the airport, but you really need to focus on the 99%, which means you need to talk about reducing flights. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. If there are no more public commenters, we will close our second public comment on that, and we will thank the airport staff and the staff from the HBU came. And thank you.
Thank you all very much.
There is one more person who just raised their hand.
Wave their hand.
They did speak during the original public comment.
So did or did not?
They did. Maybe they can send their comments to the TEUC, and we'll make sure they get included and forwarded to Nick to. They already have. Okay. Okay, that brings us to our final deliberative item. I know we're running a little late, but I apologize for that. But we wanted to take up a couple resolutions that were Forwarded to us by NPAs, Award 2, 3 NPA and Award 5 NPA around naming the roundabout after Tony Reddington. So we're taking that up. And I'll open the discussion.
I mean, I would like to understand the process by which roundabouts get named. I think it would be great if we could name that after Tony. I'd move that, but you know, it's on a state highway, Route 7, and I'm sure that there's some process. So that's what I would want to hear first, so that we can get through it.
Oh, did you want to?
I can give
Yeah,
a brief
absolutely.
update. Thanks for bringing this based on the NPA's guidance. I have been trying to get updates. Did reach out a couple weeks ago to V-Trans and Federal Highway on their allowance. Their response was a little bit different. Their highways are mostly rural in nature. So they talked about naming as a street, and then they talked about naming like a veterans highway, for example, but not kind of naming a specific piece of infrastructure on a US Route 7, which is a federal system. I did forward those communications over to the city attorney. City attorney is, as you know, understaffed right now. I got initial feedback from them probably 30 minutes before the meeting, which was generally, we need more time to take a look at this. What they said was that likely a dedication of, if the council wanted to go this route, a dedication would likely be more appropriate than a renaming of the infrastructure. And that given there are some specific regulations about placement of things on a federal aid system, that we would need to delve into that more. My suggestion is to give the attorney some more time to come to us and to consider this, given the hour next month. Ultimately, staff's position, we're in the business of maintaining infrastructure. That's our focus. Naming, we don't have a policy. So it's time consuming, it's complex, it's inherently political. Our suggestion is that we don't really have a role in it, other than providing you information, deciding what.
Okay.
I mean, I remember, and now it was when I was in the attorney's office, the historic markers on Battery Street around Little Italy and the work that was done there. So, I mean, I think that, you know, whether we call it naming or a dedication, I don't even know what that means. It generally means you're giving somebody a piece of property, but it could mean, right, that's my lawyer says, yeah, we're dedicating and accepting. Or somebody's dedicating something, a piece of property, and you're accepting it. But if it's sort of like we're honoring somebody, it's akin to a historic marker that just sort of marks, and honors somebody for their work. And perhaps if V-Trans could be approached with that regard, it'd sort of be like, isn't there a plaque on the bridge going into Winooski that commemorates the fact that it got trashed in the 27 flood, something like that? I mean,
Maybe.
yes, I'm not.
I believe I.
But it's not
But
dedicated.
It's not recognizing any particular person.
Right, I understand it, but it is a plaque that commemorates something. And so the question would be, could we have a plaque on this in a way that is safe, doesn't destroy, the vision that everybody needs, although there are lots of things that do that, that would recognize Tony, because I mean, it's not a street, right? So it's not like I think it's a little odd to dedicate an intersection for somebody, right? This is the Bernie Sanders, intersection. It's like that doesn't make it, but it's huge. It would be huge, it would be a huge intersection. But I think that's what people are looking for, at least in wards 2 and 3. Some sort of honoring of Tony for his tenacity and the fact that this actually came to fruition. So, and is that helpful in terms of guidance and of asking V-Trans about a plaque, you know, that would honor? I mean, whether we do that or not, it's, up to, I don't know how we make the decision. It's a council resolution and what have you.
I think it's certainly more specificity to a request, and then we could then get the attorneys to weigh in on that more narrow question.
I had 3, and you answered one, or you said it's in process. Do we have the authority to name something? And I know you're seeking guidance from the city attorney's office right now on that.
Yeah.
And then do we have a naming policy? I know that like Parks has a naming policy for things, and if we do something absent a naming policy, we're sort of setting a precedent. And so the question is, what other things might people want to name? And so it'd be good, whether or not we do this, to accompany it with a policy of some kind.
We don't have one.
Or we don't have.
No, I mean, right.
I mean, we'd have to
And
develop.
actually, Parks and Rec had one because it happened some time ago. And in fact, there have been there's a lot of contentiousness over naming things.
Yeah, and then in my last question, and these I know are sort of like rhetorical in some ways, I guess. It's what do the South Enders think? That, I mean, it's in their neighborhood. Like if someone came in the New North End and wanted to name one of our streets, I would want to have some input on.
Well, you have Ward 5s, so
Right,
we
we have
know what part, it's not all in Ward 5, right? It's in Ward 6 as well, right? Or is it fully in Ward 6?
It's in Ward 6.
So it was right across the street. Right, depends on where the line, where's the line go? You know,
It's right there.
It's
isn't it?
right there.
Through the
It's
roundabout.
in Ward 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Let's just call it. 6.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So that's my thinking on it, and I appreciate the sentiment, and I appreciate all the work that Tony did, and I still have lots of his email in my inbox from, he would advocate for roundabouts at every possible opportunity, so so I understand all of that, but that's sort of where I'm coming from. So I guess as a committee, what do we, how can we move forward on this by having, would DPW find it a reasonable request to keep on, ask V-Trans, I guess, about.
Yeah, I think now that there's a little more information about what the suggestion is, I can get additional feedback from our city attorney and from V-Trans.
And then in terms of like, if we did that, then, I mean, would it be naming it or would it just be a plaque? And then would we want to accompany it with a policy of some sort, and how would we develop it? And we certainly would want to understand that too. Do others agree that that's important, or?
I mean, I'm not in favor of naming things after people unless we have a policy about it. We would be setting a precedent, and I think it's a dangerous thing to set a precedent. We're just gonna open ourselves up to other streets, other places that have, I don't know, just intersections that are particularly historic in one way or another. I would think it would be best to have a policy about it. Unless the idea is not to name, I really don't know exactly what we're exactly talking about, so it's sort of hard to comment.
So I am not the opinion that we have to have a perfect scenario before we move ahead with this. And I think that perhaps even if other things rise, it will give us an opportunity to look at components of a naming policy. That said, it is a little odd to be naming a particular infrastructural element after somebody, like I was saying. And I think that the idea of in a way, it's a historic marker. Akin to the historic markers is something that to honor that his work. And this is the first of the first roundabout in the city.
It actually isn't.
It's not, what is it? Oh,
There's
wait,
one in the old North End.
where is it?
It is on,
Strong
yeah.
traffic.
Yeah, that is,
It's a roundabout.
yeah, it's
It's
somebody.
a roundabout.
Okay, yeah, we could talk about the one outside of Colin's house and there's okay.
It's a
Sort of-
small roundabout.
Sort of like that little pavement that was thrown in on Mansfield Avenue and the top of North Street, right?
I'm not sure I know.
Exactly.
Where,
Exactly.
I don't even know where.
Right there at the intersection, right by the stop sign, it was just slightly raised and it was painted in the grid section. And they tried to get people to go around it, but nobody went around it. It was just a ridiculous thing. So anyway, and it's no longer sort of. So I am okay with not moving to to develop a policy before we do that, because in my mind, we've got a lot more important things to spend our time doing. But I do think we should honor Tony in some way. In that location. For this particular project. I think it'd be fitting. So that's where I'm at.
I want to be cognizant of the load that DPW has already, so I don't want to ask. Request that you do a lot of additional work. This, I think, so I'll sort of look for your sense of it.
Yeah, I can get more feedback from the attorneys to bring to next month. I think it's a valid question about the policy and how much time these things take. These are kind of why staff kind of ducks in these types of scenarios. They get a life of their own. I think honestly, the one challenge here is with any recent person, and Tony did a lot of really amazing advocacy. A lot of his advocacy was supporting things the city was trying to do, and a lot of his advocacy was against things the city was trying to do. And we can argue whether, certain elements were good or bad or what have you, but we're all complex beings, myself included, and stepping into these waters can be challenging and time consuming. So I can bring some more information. I think a policy, if that's something we want to develop, is going to need to be committee led, and if it's the will of the committee, we'll staff it and support it. If you want to act without a policy, and that's your prerogative.
Well, this item is informational, so no action is required. I guess we would just continue to have the conversation in next month's meeting.
With more information from the
Yeah,
city.
more information from the city attorney.
Yeah. That works for me.
And I misspoke earlier when I said that was our last item. It was wishful thinking. We still have a couple of updates on North Winooski Avenue and the bike share MOU.
Those have come to the council. So, I mean, the North Winooski Avenue update, didn't that come, or am I just thinking that because I've read it?
These are both newer updates.
Okay,
that we
all right, my
provided to you,
apologies.
But the thought was to just make them informational updates. You had a long agenda. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions.
I do have questions. I mean, but I'll ask.
No, I mean, sometimes I forget, I received this.
We type lots of
Yeah,
notes.
see, I received these a while ago and I had forgotten that it wasn't on an agenda. I've seen it such a long time ago. So go ahead. I mean, if you want to ask the questions, or do you want to ask them?
I had one question about the bike share update, and I noticed, I did read it, and I noticed that there had been a change from one of the requests. We had asked that the operator shall integrate escalating pricing into the fee structures to discourage uninterrupted recreational trips. And that's been stricken and replaced with the cost for a 2-hour bike share ride shall be greater than or equal to the cost to rent an e-bike from one of the Burlington local bike shops. And I was wondering about the thinking on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we had a meeting with some of the partners a couple of weeks back, one thing that the South Burlington planning director said was, well, our community actually wants to encourage, like hour-long rides. And we also heard that Bird doesn't have, necessarily the technological infrastructure in place to easily integrate this escalating fee structure, which is a pretty specific thing to ask. So instead of being so prescriptive about requiring escalating pricing, we decided to kind of go with the intent of what that is, which is to make the cost for a recreational bike share ride the same as renting an e-bike from a local bike shop. So that's the thinking.
I'm just wondering, do you think the local bike shops would see that as is that a substantive change, or is it just to accommodate the Bird's ability to integrate it? I'm just hoping that the local bike shops are also good with this.
We can certainly share this with them in a spirit of transparency.
Yeah.
The goal we heard from the rural, more for the more spread out cities, because both Winooski and South Burlington are cities, is that frankly, a trip from the edges of South Burlington and Burlington can take an hour, and they did not want this to all of a sudden become, something that was unattainable economically to their residents. They're the same members we are, and so I think we just honestly are trying to find a way to thread the needle between meeting all 3 member communities' interests and our great local independent bike shops.
Fair enough. I was just being sort of cognizant of the sort of schism we had last time with Bolt and not trying to recreate that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
and
out of this, we'll follow up with them, share kind of what we heard from the other communities and this proposed approach going forward.
And my last question is on North Winooski Avenue update. Is there still ongoing work with private property owners on the off-street parking?
Yes, the one addition into the memo this month is that one nonprofit on the corridor, I don't want to name who they are because we're still working it out, but that entity is basically saying that they will open their lot off peak hours to adjacent uses without us managing it. They will just do it free of charge.
I saw that in the report. That's
Nice.
great.
Thank you.
Yes,
A plus for your reading of that. So that's exciting. I was just today reaching out to the Bus Barn condo owners, Faux Hung, Old Spokes Home, the brewery, and trying to figure out if they're interested in participating as well. They had a meeting yesterday. They're not moving all that quickly. They want to see how it sugars off. I'm absolutely in regular communication trying to get more.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know it's been a difficult and challenging process. So those are my questions.
Good. So the last one first, I actually was in a meeting, TDM meeting today with John of Old Spokes and Deb Sachs and Alicia Taylor from Carshare. And on the parking lot, I mean, I think there is potential. It is slow, but the change, the perceived change, I don't know if it is really a change except from long ago, of the city actually administering and managing seemed to John to be really, really positive. So I think there is great hope, and I advocated for the actually akin to the no policy on naming. The good is, and the good is not, shouldn't be opposed by the perfect. So therefore, if you get one lot that is working under this system, that will show other people that this is possible. So I think that, yeah, August is a time that they meet again, but I do think that there is a possibility. This group was talking about reaching out to the neighborhood, and there's some really good ideas. I would hope that we would be able, if asked, and it makes sense, to put in additional TDM money. I know that there is not in that initial pot, so, but a way to continue to foster the self-organization, which is really what is potentially happening here, and to keep on this, because that's a tremendous opportunity there. So, and I believe actually that I facilitated what was Butch and Dave's restaurant. I forget what it's called now. But I think that they have an arrangement with legal aid now that I helped facilitate. They hadn't even talked to each other, so there may be, and Butch and Babes had one previously, so it was just a question of making the connection. So I think that there are going to be a number of events that we'll be able to be talking about transportation and mobility, equity and access, and we should be continuing to do that in every way. And in terms of the, and this actually relates some to the bike idea. It seems to me that if, and I talked to people about this, that if there were neighborhood hubs and access, and they were affordable, and the bikes actually worked, that having them in the North Winooski Avenue corridor would be really good, right? So we want to sort of think about that in terms of where they're located, because here we are, we're about to eliminate lots of parking. And if we can provide these electric bikes that work, John said that they didn't work the last time, when all was said and done, they were just a pain in the neck to work, that they were accessible, meaning you didn't have to use it. You didn't necessarily have to have your phone, although maybe everybody has got their phones now, because like CarShare has cards. They're just alternatives, just so that people can actually use them, that they were affordable. This would be a good thing to have, particularly in this area where we are going to be stressing them with parking. And generally speaking, the only thing in the contract that I saw that I don't think it's protective enough is the removal provision. And that's because at the end of the day, when somebody walks away, they walk away, and yeah, we're stuck with it, but we're stuck with it like we're stuck with the, whatever they were, the bull bikes now. And so I see nothing in here about any deposit or any monies held in escrow in the case that that's happening. So when all is said and done, when somebody says, we're done, these things don't work, goodbye, we're going to end up, and it's right here, we're going to end up picking that cost up. So I'm concerned about that.
Doesn't CAMLA own them though? I mean, and that's different than Volt, where we have possession of the property, but ownership isn't clear, right?
It shall become the property of CAMLA, but like it's dead equipment. So now you've got a bunch of junk that's heavy that you got to dispose of at the solid waste, facility. Yeah, exactly. Right. And that you have to pay for and send up to Coventry. So I just think that in terms of protecting us, because the city shall have the right to remove the equipment. And notify people, yeah, but we're not getting caught, we're gonna get stuck again. It reminds me of when Zapco left. Ran the landfill methane.
Yeah.
And they just up and left in the best contract in the world.
I don't know this, I don't know, when this happened a long time ago.
While I was working here, I was, the question was whether we were gonna sue them.
Oh.
Or not, and it didn't make any sense. We had nothing to make them hold to their contract. It wasn't worth doing it. I think it's really the same with the Bolt bikes. We might want to get some cash on the barrelhead first as a deposit. If it's going to be a long-term thing, thrown in a CD.
Yeah.
But this isn't ours.
This, right.
This
it's
isn't,
not ours,
this is
it's capital.
Catma, right?
And, we're getting this for free.
Yeah.
And so, honestly, we can ask for. I think in an ultimate world, I totally agree with you. This is like, okay, we put out the RFP, we got 2 proposals, one was not so great. This was the only one that this is a marginal operation. I'm willing to take a risk. I hear you. Ultimately, if there's a real cost in managing this, maybe, but it's Catma's collection. They collected the bulk thing. We were a little bit involved in labor, maybe a couple hours of 3 people. Wasn't a big lift. I won't take a risk.
Well, as long as we are not going to be on a dime, as long as Catma is going to be the one that's going to pony up, I'm okay with it. But this does not seem to clarify that. You might want to get that clarified, because even if it's just language like shall have the right to remove, I'm looking at page 4 on 3B, right to remove such equipment, and whether you're going to say and be reimbursed for that cost by Catma, or that, or by the operator and or Catma, something to that, just to make it absolutely clear that the city is going to not be paying for the removal storage of it, unless that's part of the deal. But then we want to, factor that in terms of the cost and look at that up front, because it is we've seen this already. This is in operator. It's okay. And with that, I've talked about.
Okay.
It's okay, it's all good.
So moving on, if there's no other comments on number 8, we'll go on to the director's report.
Construction season starting. We're doing water, wastewater, stormwater relining. We have to overlay and ledge. I believe we've had good conversations with Paul. We expect the Champlain Parkway to restart middle of April. The initial work for the spring will be still on the new sections of roadway. We're expecting as of July, once the legal lawsuit is resolved around the Parkway, we'll pivot to Lakeside Avenue and Pine Street. Where the construction portal will be up and running by mid-April, so we're still finishing that, thanks to many other folks here, helping put all the sidewalk projects and other items into the capital project portal. Happy to answer any questions given the hour.
That's a quick report.
No,
we all want to go home.
No questions. Okay. So councilor updates. None.
I'm good. I gave you the thing on Windows.
I'm going to talk that a little bit now. Sorry. So Councilor Bergman and I met again to go through the question set that we had developed and covered last time at the TEUC around the McNeil Forum / symposium that we've been talking about. And so we talked about potentially clarifying the question set, which I've done and provided a draft to Councilor Bergman on. And he's going to draft a communication, a letter, an invite for people that we might want to invite. One of the other things we talked about is because it's a lot of material, is to potentially chunk off just pieces of it, and either have a series of forums or focus more intently, at least initially, on some of the questions around emissions as an example, and maybe defer some of the other things to another forum, to an additional forum. So we haven't really talked much more than that, except in a conceptual level. Also, I guess I'd like to say this is the last meeting of the TEUC for this council year. I know that my intention, if you know, is the will of the city council president, whomever that might be, to keep me here. I would like to stay, and I know that Councilor Bergman has indicated similarly. So hopefully we have some continuity going into the next council year. And these two projects around BTV and understanding the emissions there, and understanding the emissions and what we might do to address, to optimize, to minimize those emissions at BTV, and we'll continue to talk about that. And I guess with that, I will stop talking. Which brings us to our next meeting, which is 4/25. We have potentially 4/25. If that works, and if we can get this room, and if we're still here.
Right. Right. I think at this point, we'll keep it as a placeholder.
Okay.
If it works for the reconstituted committee, we'll keep it. If we need to reschedule, we'll do that.
Okay. And with no further business, and no objection, I will adjourn us at 7:45. I'm sorry we were long tonight.
That was a long agenda.
It didn't seem that long
Well,
when we looked at it.
It was a pretty long agenda.